going to continue stop 1 with pit stop B, where we're going to talk about the third type of investigations, and that is called experimental investigations. I feel like the last video cut off kind of short, so if you didn't get to see a full page of what these notes should look like, here's a review of page 8. This is what the bottom looked like, and then you should have filled in the examples from the Check Your Understanding website. So we're going to move on to page 9 now, okay, and our title is going to be Experimental Investigations. And remember, an investigation is just the process in which we are making observations, collecting data and evidence that is going to answer a scientific question. A lot of times when we think of an investigation, I think we think of an experiment, and that is more of this type of investigation. If you see, that's the beginning of this word right here in experimental. So oftentimes when we think of a science experiment, what we're thinking of is an experimental investigation. Okay, this one is, has its own page because it's a little bit more in-depth and complicated. It has a little bit more parts of that scientific inquiry or scientific method. So we're going to go ahead and start by defining an experimental investigation. An experimental investigation is a fair test, and we'll talk about what makes that fair in just a second. It's when a fair test is designed in which variables are changed, controlled, and measured in an effort to support or disprove a hypothesis. Remember, that's our prediction. So it's kind of a long definition. It says, again, a fair test is designed in which variables are changed, controlled, and measured in an effort to support or disprove a hypothesis. So when it says fair test, what that means is you have to be sure that you're controlling all other constants aside from what you are testing, what those variables are that you're changing. And so that's what we mean by fair test. We did use some words in here that we need to define. Specifically, I want to start talking about variables. Remember, we said that comparative investigations could have variables. Experimental investigations definitely have variables, and there are two different kinds of variables that we need to focus on. So again, a variable is a factor in an experiment that changes or can be changed. If you think about the word vary, V-A-R-Y, that means to change. So variable is something that changes or can be changed. Now we have two different types of variables that we need to focus on. One of them is the one that changes, and one of them is the one that can be changed. The two different types of variables we're going to talk about are an independent variable and a dependent variable. Okay, so these are the two types of variables. Starting with the independent variable, okay, this is the variable that is changed on purpose by the scientist. This is what you are, what you are testing. Okay, so we're going to say changed on purpose, and that's important, by the scientist, which is you if you're conducting the investigation. The variables are very important when it comes to graphing and showing our results of our investigation. So it's important to, every time we think about the different variables, think about where does it go on the graph. And when we graph the independent variable, this goes on the x-axis, or the bottom of the graph. The dependent variable, you can remember this as in it depends on the independent one. It is going to change as a result of this. This is like the effect. So this is the one that changes as a result of the independent variable. Another way to think about this is what you are measuring. This is what you're looking for, the result that you're measuring or observing. This is going to go on the y-axis of the graph. Like I said, another way to think about it is this is the cause and this is the effect. What happens, what is the effect based on what you changed over here? Now, I mentioned earlier that the experimental investigation has to be a fair test. We've got to know if we're testing a particular variable, we've got to have a normal group, one that's not affected by the variables or that has a norm that we can compare it to. And that's what we call the control group. So the control is a setup without the variable being tested. This is the normal conditions. Another way to keep your investigation fair and to make sure that you really are only looking at the independent variable, there are other things called constants. Say you were determining which type of soil was best for plant growth. You would have to be sure that you're using the same type of plants, the same type of soil, giving them the same amount of water or the same amount of sunlight. Anything else needs to stay the same so that we know what we're testing and what we're seeing the results of is just that independent variable, which is the amount of soil. Another example I'll put down at the bottom for you is how does the temperature of ocean water affect the